Hi, this is Lynn Wilson. I'm your instructor, and this is my introduction to entrepreneurship. There's no better time in America to work for yourself. Whether you want to find a freelance gig in technology, provide your own products to the public, or get a contract with the city, I have found that the opportunities here are humongous. I moved back to my hometown of Denver in 2007, and that was when the recession was really starting to kick in for every major city. You could see construction cranes for miles throughout the metro region, especially in the downtown area or near DIA. And honestly, they have not stopped. So, what is entrepreneurship? Well, I've been in entrepreneurship for a while, so I think for me it needs to start at the beginning. And when I say the beginning, I mean like what influenced me to take this journey through entrepreneurship, which I believe is very multifaceted, and I'm really excited because technology is making it easier for anybody to become an entrepreneur. For me, it was seeing it modeled from my grandmother who ran her own hair salon at my grandparents' house to my parents who I constantly saw starting side businesses despite having full-time jobs. It always seemed like that was something they desired to do, was work for themselves, and just somehow never could really make it work. I think back on one of my dad's biggest projects he did was to run a video rental store, which was really a precursor to Blockbuster. But unfortunately, he opened it up kind of in a warehouse area as opposed to a retail store area, so no one really knew that it was there. But it was still fun to take part in trying to help him start this cool business as a kid. My first business really didn't take off until 1999, and it was totally by accident. I was a fresh new corporate guy straight out of college. I was doing my taxes, and the tax preparer noticed that my profession was being an IT person. So he asked me, you do IT, huh? I was like, yeah. And so he actually was having an issue with his uh, computers, and he was telling me how he had this tech consultant that he was contracting to try to fix the Y2K bug that was just around the corner. And my company had already figured out how to fix the bug, but there were a lot of small businesses that had no idea how they were going to deal with their computer crashing or anything like that. It was a software glitch in Microsoft at the time. And so he told me his story, and I listened. And what baffled me was when he shared with me that he was paying this guy $150 an hour, and my eyes just turned into saucers, I think. And I couldn't believe someone was making about 5 times more money doing exactly what I was doing in corporate. And so I just kind of chuckled and told him, well, shoot, I'd do it for half that. And he actually called my bluff. And so that actually started me on this journey that went from just kind of doing his tech support at his office. So that tax preparer actually happened to be the owner of franchises throughout the city where I lived. And so he began telling his friends and his associates. And so I was literally running all over a town trying to fix people's computers and fix Y2K. and I realized that I needed help. So I began hiring some of my friends that I worked with to help me with this side business. And the side business started becoming another full-time business. And at one point, I was really kind of at that crux trying to figure out whether or not I needed to quit my job. And I was pretty scared, actually, to quit my job, not because I wasn't young and definitely willing to take a risk, but because I had no idea what I was doing beyond fixing computers. I had not really been trained formally on how to hire employees, how to set up proper legal structure. So it was really something that was like a gut check and a heart check at the time. And so I actually decided that I would do neither. Um, in other words, after Y2K happened, things started slowing down for my business, not necessarily for work, but I really didn't like the structure of my job either. I was working 60, 70 hours a week, plus I was on call, plus we would have to travel all the time. And what I liked about the lure of entrepreneurship, it always seemed like you could set your own schedule, you could come and go as you pleased, and I really wanted that lifestyle, and I knew I couldn't get it within the corporate structure. So I decided that I needed to upgrade my brain, and so I looked into grad school, and because I was making really good money working for corporate and with this side business of fixing computers for small businesses, which actually led to doing computer support and build outs for really nice homes in upscale neighborhoods, I decided to just shut everything down. I quit my job, shut down the business. I was so ignorant about entrepreneurship at the time, I didn't realize I could have probably sold that business to somebody else. But I had a dream, and that dream was to move to Miami. And I had the money, I had the moxie, and I just applied to grad school down there at a private college who actually needed an IT professional in one of their departments. So I applied for that job, got hired, and that job actually helped pay for grad school. It was after grad school that I decided to switch careers completely. I no longer was interested in IT, and from all my studies, I definitely saw that IT was beginning to kind of go down in popularity, and so I was really an investor. I liked that side of business. I liked making passive income by investing in stock, but unfortunately the stock market had crashed as well, and so by then I had bought a little condo about a mile from the beach, and it was starting to go up in value really fast because all of a sudden I found myself in this housing market that was just growing tremendously. There was a bunch of people from all over the world who wanted to buy real estate in Miami at the time, and so all these high rises were being built, and it was a really exciting time. My little $70,000 condo, within 3 years of me living there, had went all the way up to about $250,000. And so I said, well, maybe real estate is the way I should go. And so I started looking at properties in South Florida, and there was no way I could afford anything down there. And so I remembered where I worked, in North Florida, and said, well, maybe I could go back. Maybe the property is cheaper up there. And it was. It was significantly cheaper. The bubble really hadn't uh, moved up north. So the other exciting part was that in 2005, North Florida was going to host their very first Super Bowl in a smaller town. So this town, that city that I was wanting to move back to, was going to host it. And so I decided to buy my first property, which was this little old clunker, in 2004. And so that was actually my first foray into full-time entrepreneurship. I had always had side businesses, like I said in the last slide, since 1999. Definitely did stuff before that, but these were the most significant businesses. And so I decided that real estate was the way to go. That's how I would build wealth. And so when I took on this first property, I had no idea what I was getting into. I knew that initially I wanted to be able to help communities develop and gentrify in my own way. And this particular downtown neighborhood was starting to gentrify, but there was three mentors that really had control of that neighborhood, and one of them I was lucky enough to connect with, who, as I illustrate, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I don't know if you've ever read that book by Robert Kiyosaki. It's a great book. Definitely one of those entrepreneur Bibles. But in that book, it talks about this young man's journey of trying to figure out how to live life, how to be, a successful American, basically. He's from Hawaii, and he had a best friend whose dad was rich. His dad he considered poor, which wasn't necessarily true, because his dad actually was a high-level administrator in higher education in the state of Hawaii. So he lived a comfortable middle-class life, but for some reason he learned a lot more from the rich dad, who surprisingly only had a high school education. So what he learned from his poor dad is what a lot of us here growing up, get an education so you can get a good job for 20 years and get your gold watch. Whereas from rich dad, he was teaching him a totally different mindset. And that mindset really was, don't work for anybody, start a business, grow it. If you need money, sell it. If not, hire employees so that they can help you grow it. And then eventually you'll become wealthy. And that's exactly what happened with Rich Dad. Whereas Poor Dad, although he had status and prestige, he didn't have any control over his life. And I actually would like to add a third dad to that, a third mentor, who I like to call Underground Dad. So I had all three of these mentors. I had my very first mentor during that stint was Poor Dad, and Poor Dad actually was not very poor at all. He had about $8 million in real estate just in that downtown area alone. And the reason I call him Poor Dad was I had learned by hanging out with him, learning his techniques and strategies, that most of the properties he owned were using other people's money. He was very savvy, very charismatic at convincing others to invest in what he was doing, which was actually very socially responsible, socially conscious. He would, instead of what most people do when they are trying to upgrade a neighborhood, a poor neighborhood, they usually will go in, renovate a bunch of houses on one block, which he did. Attract people from out of town who don't have the stigma, don't know the backstory, don't know the history of the neighborhood, and convince them to buy because it's right there next to downtown, which usually downtowns all kind of fluctuate in popularity depending on what's going on. And so he did those things, but he also preserved a creative class. And what I mean by that is these are folks that kind of bring culture to the city. Musicians, artists, innovators. And what he would do, because they usually didn't have a lot of money, he would subsidize their rent by selling some of the fixed properties that were single family. He had a mixture of all kinds of properties, mixed family, duplexes, quads, you name it. But he would sell off the single family homes to more, yuppies that were moving to the city, and that would offset any costs of keeping his rent low and some of the other properties that he owned. And it worked really well. There was a good balance. It kept a good mix and diversity in the neighborhood. It didn't force people who couldn't afford higher rent to move somewhere else. And I liked that model, and it was one of the main reasons why I chose him as my first mentor. But we'll find out later why I consider him my poor dad. The rich dad came second. He moved to the neighborhood because the city had such a hard time trying to convince people to come to the neighborhood to help fix it up that they actually had an auction of some of the property lots. And if you can imagine, downtown Denver property lots, probably at this point, depending on how close you are to Spear or any of the other main arteries of downtown, probably would go for $500,000. So in this city, their downtown lots for this auction were going for about $10,000. And this guy scooped up $1 million worth of lots. So that's 100 lots. That's how many lots were available in this neighborhood of about 4,000 homes and properties. So Rich Dad had an interesting business model. He actually liked to build new homes that looked old. So they had a really nice architectural features, kind of like this one. But instead of it being old like this one, that I took a 100-year-old home and turned it into that, he would just build them brand new. And because they were up to the latest building codes, the yuppies really loved those homes, and so they were willing to pay almost double for those homes than they would even for our renovated homes that me and poor dad usually did. Underground Dad came a little bit later in my career there. I met him through a business association that we were both involved in. I eventually became kind of a recognized protege of poor dad mentor, and so he helped me get elected as the president of the business association for the neighborhood. And Underground Dad was actually one of the board members of that association. He was really intriguing to everyone in the neighborhood because this particular neighborhood had a lot of old homes that needed a lot of money to fix up. As a matter of fact, my very first home that I fixed there, even though I only bought, it was a 2,500 square foot home that I bought for about $66,000. And my bank, there's special banks that you have to go through sometimes to fix up old homes. And they were willing to lend me $100,000, which I thought at the time was more than enough to get this home fixed. Little did I know, due to all the fire damage, theft, a lot of hazards when you're renovating old homes in kind of a old, rough neighborhood, that I would need almost double that to really get that home to be livable, marketable. And so Underground Dad he actually moved to the neighborhood because he bought an old mansion. This was a historic neighborhood, by the way. And so there were some mansions there that were really old, really dilapidated. I mean, not exactly the kind of mansions that most people think of in any suburb. And he dropped $1 million into the mansion that he purchased. He wanted it to be as authentic as it was back in the 1900s. And that just blew everyone's mind. One, that he was audacious to do that in a still turning over neighborhood, but also that he had that much money to blow on one property that he was going to live in, him and his wife. So as I got to know him, I realized that he ran his business a little bit differently than some of the folks that I was hanging around, which were all real estate people. So by the time 2007 came around, I was definitely house rich and cash poor. And what's interesting about kind of that recession that was starting to rear its ugly head is that it really separates folks that are managing businesses and doing business very wisely as opposed to foolishly. And so if you were to go back to that neighborhood, you would discover that the only person that still owns property actually owns some of the other mentors' property is Underground Dad. And the reason for that is because Rich Dad and Poor Dad, and including myself, we only focused on one thing, and that was real estate. Once the economy turned, once people began getting unemployed, and just people couldn't afford to pay for the homes they were in, our business just crashed. But Underground Dad, that was not his primary business. His primary business was accounting and bookkeeping. That was the firm that he had. He had a group of CPAs, and that's all they did was, do people's books, mainly small business and mid-sized businesses, and even a few large-sized businesses. And I don't care what state the economy is in, you're always going to need accountants. So that was my journey to full-time entrepreneurship. It was for 3 years. House rich and cash poor is kind of this term that means that, yeah, I had about $1 million worth of real estate inventory by the time it was all said and done. But because I wasn't really able to sell any houses due to the market, I didn't have any money to cover all of the different mortgages. And so I was definitely staring foreclosure in the face by the time 2007 rolled around. So when I came back to Denver in 2007, I saw articles like this: $54 million renovation project to rebuild, renovate, and start new light rail with Union Station. $500 million project to build a hotel right near the Denver International Airport. $1 billion approved by the federal government to build a VA hospital right next to the Children's Hospital off of Colfax and 225. And of course, a $2 billion project to expand light rail transit all over Metro Denver, including the Front Range. And as I speak today, they're looking at expanding to Boulder. So what this made me realize, coming from the East Coast, is that moving to Colorado, man, there's a lot of opportunities here. And I also realized that a lot of other people, not just myself, saw that opportunity in Colorado as well. I would say in the last 3 years, over 300,000 people have moved here. There's just been a steady rise in people who want to move to Colorado, or specifically to Denver, due to a lot of things, a lot of popular industries: oil and gas, agriculture, aerospace. But I also know that people like the lifestyle here. There's a lot of liberal values. The outdoor life is great, although many people assume there's a lot of snow here. It's still, over 300 days of sunshine. So there's no doubt Denver is a growing city. And if you're young or just a new entrepreneur or wanting to look at this as a career, how can you go about getting a slice of pie? And so that's really what this course is about, is trying to help you find those resources, take advantage of all these great opportunities of being in this fine city, and position yourself to take advantage of those opportunities.